One of the reasons which I believe that the current education system in England is broken is that there's a huge achievement gap that manifests itself in lots of different places. 1 in 6 kids on free school meals, which is one way of measuring challenge or deprivation in schools, leave school without any basic literacy and numeracy skills. They don't meet the minimum standards which the government set for children. We heard earlier that independent school students number about 7% of the entire UK schools population. Yet in university education, not just Redbrick universities, but any way that you want to classify university, the proportion of students that are in university education is nearer 40% come from independent backgrounds. There's a vast discrepancy in the opportunity that children have. And the discrepancy is even greater if you look at the children in the most difficult circumstances. 16% of children that are eligible for free school meals in the country go on to further education, whereas 96% of students in independent schools go on to higher education. There's a really big gap, and basically it's not fair. There's definitely a need to address this at a systemic level, and the government has been working for years. The previous government, the current government has plenty of plans that they've stated on how to address this. But everything that you look at in the past, the change in the system is too slow. It's the problem with any sort of bureaucratic organisation. You need to change it. You can work as hard as you can. You can have the best people working on it, but it's too slow. And it's too slow because children only get one education. You can't go back and fix things for a lot of these kids once they've left school. So if they have a city school experience, that's their life, basically. So I argue that we need to change it faster than we can, given the current system of change. And academies are one way of speeding that up. By taking a school out of its local education authority regulation and allowing it to administer its own funding, hire and fire its own staff, and have a much greater say in the way that they teach students, you can foster innovation and creativity in a much more effective way. One way of looking at it is if you're trying to run a school, if you're trying to fund things, who's best placed to make the decisions that affect these children, given that there is no standard model of school. Every school you go into is different. Every school that I've seen, every school that I've read about has its own unique culture, ethos, aspects. The people that are best placed to decide what's best for those students in that school are the people that are closest to those children. So, taking schools out, schools that need an opportunity to try new things, I think is an excellent way of addressing this gap. In terms of the evidence, it's limited at the moment because academies have been around for 10 years. There's a study concluded in 2008 by PricewaterhouseCoopers that states that although there's a lot of diversity in these academies throughout much of the time, they are doing above average overall, and there's some schools that have increased results from, for example, 35% 5A to Cs to 70% 5A to Cs. Is that my time?
That's perfect, thank you. Now we go over to our final speaker to state the case for private education. Ed Turner.
Thank you, Debating Society. Thank you for inviting me. Firstly, many of you here may think of me as elitist Tory toff, being from Conservative Future, but I beg to differ, actually. However, I'm just a student like yourself, at university in my second year, studying, and I do care about state and private education. I care for the importance of it, and I think, obviously, like Steve, the debate between what is better, state or private, is a little irrelevant even. I promote the right for all to choose whether they want a private or state education. I encourage academies I am for the investment in state education. But I'm here today to really uphold the existence and promotion of why we have private schools. Not to abolish them, but to keep them, because they really serve a good purpose in society. And my main point would be that they offer choice, an alternative. As Steve pointed out, only 7% go to private schools. It's an alternative, obviously, if you can afford it, but it's there if you want it. I'll give you a quick definition of what private schools are. I'm sure you'll know, but I'll give you one anyway. Private schools, also known as independent schools, are not administered by local, state or national governments, thus they retain the right to select their students and are funded in whole or in part by charging their students tuition, rather than relying on the public government. There's obviously, with private schools, we pay. If I choose myself, if I want to go to a private school, I decide to pay so many fees. I don't consult the government, they don't give me any money. I decide if I want to pay £9,000 a year, whatever it is. It's my choice. And that's my biggest point. It's your choice. If you do well in life and you have kids and you think the state school in my catchment area is not what I want for my child, it's not living up to my expectation, and so there's a private school in the catchment area or say nearby, and you have the money, there you are, the choice. For example, one thing I was educated, for example, at a grammar school, a private grammar school. One thing my parents always used to say, if obviously you've got the financial resource, you have the choice whether you want a class size of 15, 10, 15, or 30. Obviously, in an ideal situation, we'd have equal class sizes across the board in state and private education, because there would be that disparity. But the world is not perfect. We have things we want to change, but obviously we have our ideals and we want to reach that greater goal. But I'm a realist, and I believe that you have to adopt a sense of idealism on how to change things, but also a sense of reality of the situation. And I think in this case, this really pushes the argument through. Also, I'd say that there's greater autonomy in private schools. We're not burdened by the encouragement of the state. If you look at the last 13 years of our last government, it was very much state interference. With private schools, they offer that sense of autonomy, that chance for you the mothers and fathers one day in the future, and also you the pupils, to decide. And you can go on to student council and decide for yourself. You don't have to have the interference of the state saying you must do this, you must do that, which I think obviously is an alternative, but it's a choice, yet again. Also, public education is not perfect, nor is private education. Both forms of education have their faults. I'm one for trying to improve both forms. There's private schools which actually don't do particularly well. There's fantastic private schools. Look at St Paul's in London as one example, and I can go on. But another thing which I think private schools offer, which some people forget, that they do actually provide places for those less fortunate than most of us here. Those who want to go to, say, a private school and have a disability, but they don't necessarily have the financial income from their family, we'll give them the chance. We'll have assisted places, if so the government allows, we'll give them that chance. If they apply for a scholarship, which I think the government, for example, is pushing for a lot more scholarship places so that bright students, able students get the chance. Which I think is great, that you have the chance to actually go to a form of education if you choose to do so. Say you like the facilities, which, for example, a private school, one thing I really cherish is that they offered me great opportunity, not just the education, which I think a lot of state schools you can get the same out of the education. It was the extra dimension, the sporting facilities, the extracurricular activity, whether it be CF in the army, or just having that extra dimension, which is obviously a choice if you can afford it ultimately, but also if you have a scholarship, if you're really that able, you can also obtain that goal of actually going there. It's not a be or end all because you haven't got the money. I reject that argument outright. But
Thank you.
I'm
That's
complete.
5 minutes. No,
Okay.
don't worry, I think that's pretty
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Right, I said I would be strict with the timing, so I hope I've kept that promise. And now my second promise was to open it up to the audience. So if anybody has any questions, now is the time to put your hands up. Right.
A question about private schools to Ed.
Yeah.
A lot of public schools in this country have charitable status.
Yeah.
Do you want to defend that, or do you think it's right that they have charitable status?
Yeah, I believe my school had charitable status. I think when we say you obviously there's a slight income incentive. Obviously you get income, but it's not just it's charity. You give back. For example, they reinvest in
They're not
trusts.
benefiting the wider society, are they? They're benefiting.
They
from
give
their
back to
own
the local
people.
community. For example, I'll give you an example of my local school. I'll give you an example of actually even my rival school in my town. They actually paid for a playing field to be built in the or to be funded in the other part of town, not in Worcester, for a state school which was improving all the time, but didn't have that extra dimension, didn't have the sporting facilities to provide for their kids. But that private school gave them that. And therefore, we're not just about our own selves. We do give back to the community and also work with the public sector in correspondence with the private sector, so it's working together.
And also second point.
Thank you. I remind you of the speakers though. So, yes.
The question is for the three speakers. What do you think about a voucher system that would allow students to choose between public or private education?
Go ahead.
I think that in an ideal world that would be an excellent solution. However, I think that from what I was saying about the difference in funding and class size and things like that, the cost of putting a student through private school versus the cost of putting a student through state school, that there's too much of a discrepancy there in the way that both systems are running. Yes, you could bring the two systems closer together in terms of funding and then implement something like that, but that's going to take quite a time.
Any other comments from the panel?
Well, I would say ideally, if in an ideal situation, if you look at need tables, it would be great if, say there was say in a hypothetical town, a private school, it was almost being outdone by a state school, because that state school was doing so well. That would be a real success story of state education versus private education. That they're working together, trying to healthy competition. I'm for healthy competition. And that's why I think state education should be promoted as well as private education, because it creates healthy competition for society.
David, should we be promoting competition in schools?
Can I just address the,
Yes,
the issue of vouchers? I think theoretically a voucher idea is worth considering. I've got no problems with it as a theoretical idea. But attempts to convert the idea into practical policy have proved incredibly difficult. And it doesn't need me to explain why. If you have a whole nation's population having a set of vouchers which they then cash in to, in inverted commas, acquire the education of their children, this creates a highly individualised system. In fact, it doesn't create a system at all. It just creates radical individual choice. That might be in itself a good idea, but actually practically implementing it on the ground has proved difficult, nigh impossible, not just, by the way, in the United Kingdom, but also in other nations as well. Some states of California have tried, some states in the United States of America have tried to implement vouchers and found it almost nigh impossible. So I think theoretically it's a good idea and it's worth considering. I don't have an ideological objection to it. I just have a practical, political view about it, but it's just not possible to implement. What was the other question?
Well, I just thought Ed made a point about competition. I thought you might like to pick that up.
I don't think, again, I don't have ideological difficulties with competition. What matters is the form it takes. If competition means that schools in a particular locality, if you like, poach the best kids onto their pupil roles and leave other schools impoverished as a consequence, I'm not in favour of that kind of competition. But I think a competitive spirit between schools, within schools, is perfectly okay. There's nothing wrong, per se, with competition. What's wrong with competition are particular variants of it.
Right, and just before we take another question, Steve, you wanted to talk about
I
vouchers.
I believe, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I think at least part of the Swedish system that the current and previous governments seem to be holding up on a pedestal for how education could be run, gives families the option to use vouchers. And actually some of those schools are allowed to run at a profit. The initial, sorry, this is going on my memory rather than any concrete research, the initial results from them are positive with a great deal of footnotes, but I'm not sure what I think about the whole philosophy of allowing them to run at profit. I'm going to have to go and Google it a little bit more when I get home.
We'll come on to the issue of profit